Hey everyone, and welcome to Writing Our Way Out, the podcast. I'm Dave Coogan, and on this show we explore all the conditions, traps, and turning points on the path to prison in America and the way to be free. Today's episode, the end of an eye for an eye. Until recently, Virginia led the nation in the death penalty. At a bill signing ceremony to end it, Governor Ralph Northam acknowledged he once believed in eye for an eye justice, but had come to see that the death penalty was unjust and unethical. What were the ethics behind the death penalty? And where do we go from here now that we've taken a different route toward justice? One of our guests on the show today is Dale Broomfield. He was at that bill signing ceremony at Greensville Correctional Center, where they used to administer the death penalty. Dale is a field director for Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, a job he may have done so well, he worked himself into retirement. Dale is also the author of Virginia State Penitentiary, A Notorious History, and Railroaded, the true stories of the first 100 people executed in Virginia's electric chair. Welcome back to the show, Dale.
Thanks for having me, David. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Stan Craddick is also with us here today. He is one of the authors of Writing Our Way Out, Memoirs from Jail. Stan was not at the bill signing ceremony, but he was once incarcerated at Greensville Correctional Center. He was inside when people died at the hands of the state. What's happening, Stan?
Hey, good evening, Dave.
All right. So Dale, I want to start with you. How did the Commonwealth of Virginia become a leader in the death penalty, and why? What were the early arguments for the death penalty, and when did we begin to see arguments against it?
It's a long and convoluted history, David, and I'm going to try to condense it down into a few minutes and not fill the entire episode with it. Okay. Virginia executed its first prisoner in the year 1608, only 1 year after the founding of Jamestown. It was the first execution in the English-speaking new settlements of the New World. The first woman was executed in 1632. Her name was Jane Champion. She was put to death because she concealed childbirth and may have given birth to a stillborn baby, which would convicted her of infanticide. Virginia then embarked on a killing spree that basically lasted for a couple of hundred years. In my new research for my next book on the history of the death penalty and abolition in Virginia, I've discovered that Virginia executed more slaves than any other state. We executed 736 slaves, which is 86% of all slave executions in America. We executed 94 women. That doesn't sound like very many, but it's the nation's leader. It's twice as many as runner-up Massachusetts, who executed 40 women, most of them for witchcraft. Virginia executed not one woman for witchcraft. They're all for murder, infanticide, and of slave women trying to poison their masters. After the Civil War, Virginia embarked on a way to keep blacks subjugated. Since slavery wasn't there anymore, they found that capital punishment and the convict leasing program worked hand in hand in keeping the state's black population subjugated and still under the whims of white supremacy. As far as capital punishment goes, during the Jim Crow era, Virginia had relatively low lynching numbers. If you look at other southern states, we had about 100 lynchings in Virginia. That sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. It's 100 tragedies. But if you compare us to Georgia, who had over 400 lynchings, Texas, who had 300 or 400, Arkansas, Louisiana, all the other deep South states had many more lynchings than us. There's a reason for that. One of the reasons was that we were the fastest capital punishment state of any of them. We found, Virginia felt that lynching made the state look bad. We couldn't attract post-Civil War business from the North into Virginia if we were lynching. So we came up with a way to hold lynching numbers down, but we compensated by skyrocketing capital punishment numbers. Okay, frequently, if a young black man was caught, rape and attempted rape were capital crimes for black men only during this time. Up until 1960, it was a capital crime for black men only. They would get caught, convicted, and sentenced to death for touching a white woman, scaring a white girl, one man, rape. These were all attempted criminal assaults. And so these black men, a lynch mob would form at the courthouse or at the jail. And the judge or the sheriff would show up and say, you don't need to do this. We'll take care of it. Speedy justice, the law will take its place. And that placated the lynch mobs. They left. Within then, that black man would go into trial, 21, 30-minute trial. The jury would be out 5 or 6 minutes, and then they come back with a verdict of death. And this happened time and time and time again. We were executing, in 1915, we executed 11 people that year. We executed 14 people in 1912. These huge numbers from back then. So we were executing faster than anyone else. This continued up until into the 1950s. Now, there were sporadic abolition efforts along the way. There was one in 1913. There was another one in 1922, another one in 1953. And in my research, I found that it wasn't the mass assembly line executions of black men that spurred these abolition talks. It was the execution of a white man that drew talk of abolition. In 1913, it was over Floyd Allen in the Hillsville Courthouse Massacre. That was seen as white men standing up to corrupt government. In 1922, it was about I forget the case off the top of my head, but it was one that happened in 1921. In 1953, there was an abolition effort because of the Rosenberg case, not because of the 7 Martinsville black men who were executed in assembly line fashion over a 2-day period in 1951. No, that didn't upset anyone. What upset them was the Rosenbergs, the white couple who were being sentenced to federal execution for espionage. So these sporadic efforts were coming along because we were executing the wrong people, is what it came down to. Whenever a white person was executed, the abolition talk it was like clockwork. It happened over and over and over again. And then in 1963, we came to a stop. Public support with the death penalty was at an all-time low. Some states during the late 50s had abolished it. England had passed laws to slow down the use of the death penalty. And then in 1972, there were no death sentences until 1972. Then the Supreme Court stepped up and said, the death penalty is unconstitutional in America. Hallelujah, problem solved, right? Well, no. 3 years later, the Supreme Court came back again and said, it's not the death penalty that's unconstitutional, it's the way states are applying it. So they threw it back to the states, and states immediately warmed up their electric chairs, their gallows, and started enacting laws to be able to resume executions. And in Virginia, we resumed them in 1982 with the execution of a man named Frank Coppola. And then since 1982, we've executed 113 people. That is second in the nation, second only to Texas. But if you go all the way back to the beginning to 1608, we've executed 1,390 people. And that is number one. That is more than Texas and more than any other. So it's revolutionary that Virginia has taken this step because we are the leader. We've been the leader all along in executions. As little as 5 years ago, we were looking at ways to expand capital punishment. But things have changed so fast in Virginia. Now, all of a sudden, in 2021, the planets aligned due to a number of factors, and now we've abolished it. So it's been a remarkable long-running story that has gone over 413 years.
And if you missed some of that, I'm going to hold up the book one more time because my producer's telling me I didn't hold it up right the first time. There's the first book, Virginia State Penitentiary, and there is the second book, Railroaded. You can learn more about what Dale Broomfield is describing in this very quick history of a very complicated and compelling story. Stan, you were at Greensville Correctional Center when they executed John Allen Muhammad.
Yes, I was.
Right. He was tried and convicted for killing 10 people in the Metro DC area. What was it like to be inside there when the state is killing a man? What did the death penalty mean to people incarcerated?
When you get off the bus at Greensville, it's an eerie feeling. It's very the aura in the air. It's hopelessness. It's depressing. That's just when you get off the bus. You know, Greensville hold roughly 3,000 people. They have an S1, an S2, and an S3. And then on the, they utilize billing. I forget what billing it is, but they utilize the whole as the holding place for anybody that's getting ready to be eliminated. It's an eerie feeling simply because you know that regardless of what he did, there was a law. You can make up a law, and that law can kill me. And it's just like Dale said, you can make up a law that if I drop a sheet of paper, that you can execute me. And that's bad. I think when Muhammad got executed, right, a whole lot of people were desensitized because of the amount of terror and havoc that he had in Virginia. But again, you can't say that Muhammad needs to die and this person needs to live. You know, it's got to be one way regardless of how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that from the way you're describing it. I do remember visiting you at Greensville, and you're exactly right. Unlike any other jail or prison I've been to, that place is intimidating getting off the bus.
Man.
4 big gray buildings. The sky seems never to be blue. It's just forever depressing. And I don't know the half of it. I just went to the visiting room.
Yeah.
Dale, in cases like this one with Muhammad, the DT sniper, like where Stan says, I mean, people desensitized because he killed a lot of people. And yet, on the other hand, you know, you're trying not to pass judgment on these acts because all you know, it's just not right for the state to kill somebody. But in the case with Muhammad, or in more recent times like this, how did the arguments against the death penalty play out?
Well, you know, cases like that, the Muhammad case, the Ricky Gray case, the Timothy Spencer case, they always set abolition efforts back. But it seems like Ricky Gray especially set the efforts back almost a decade because of the family. The victims were so beloved in Richmond, and it just was heartbreaking. I mean, I knew the Harvey family too, and I know you want to talk more about this later. But what it boils down to, support for the death penalty always comes back to one point: revenge.
Yeah.
It comes down to revenge. There is not one study, not one report, not one statistic that shows that the death penalty works as a deterrent. In fact, death penalty states have higher homicide rates than non-death penalty states. Okay? So you're not deterring anybody. These are acts of passion, acts of compulsion. Many times they're acts of mental illness, substance abuse, domestic violence, these horrible backgrounds with these people. There are no James Bond villains on death row. Okay, these are guys who came from horrible childhoods and live in horrible situations, who committed these acts of violence. So it comes down to, one, the prosecution and the press can label the person a monster, and that carries a lot of weight. People they see monster, that's all they know. I know a death row prisoner, a death row minister who says, monsters? No, I've never met a monster on death row. Some of them were hard to reach, but no, not monsters. So it's the way these people are portrayed by the court system and by the media that shapes public opinion on what they are. You're not going to find anybody in Richmond who will say anything kind or supportive or empathetic about Ricky Gray. The same way with Muhammad. Muhammad committed terrible crimes. And it comes back to another statistic. It's not just revenge. But you can say, okay, John Allen Muhammad deserved to die for what he did. But with the Innocence Project clearing 185 people off of death row because they found compelling evidence that they were innocent, then what you're doing is for every 7 John Allen Muhammads you're putting to death because you think they clearly deserve it, statistically that 8th person is going to be an innocent person. So we have to ask ourselves as a society, can we live with that? Can we live with that one innocent? Even though when we kill 7 John Allen Muhammads, can we live with the 8th one being an innocent? That's what it comes down, and that's what the governor said. And when he signed it, he goes, we're too fallible. It's not about the heinousness of the crime. It's about the fallibility of the system.
Stan, didn't you meet a chaplain who worked death row?
Yeah, I did. When they was executing a young lady after 75 years,
Teresa
something.
Teresa Lewis.
Yeah.
Teresa Lewis.
Yeah, she we got locked down early that night. We got locked down maybe about 4 o'clock. Because of the amount of press, the amount of interest, and the amount of emotions that came with her execution. White woman, you know. She got on a radio station where she called in and sung Amazing Grace. And it was eerie. The chapel Anderson, David Anderson. He came to my cell, which I was in S3, 7 building, and we were on lockdown, and 2 men to a cell. We had access to TVs in our cells and whatnot, right? Our personal TVs. So we could watch somewhat of coverage, and we could see that Dale in a league of supporters against the death penalty were right outside of Greensville. The chapel came to my cell and asked the CO to let me out. And the CO reluctantly let me out because we were supposed to be on lockdown. And he told me he didn't feel good about this. You know, he didn't feel good about this woman being killed. I didn't feel good about it either. But in retrospect, I guess I never felt good about anybody losing their life. Not execution, but losing their life. It's interesting that Dale said that if you can control the narrative, you can control the outcome. You know? And I certainly can appreciate the statistics. But I know in this land that there are far more people have been executed than any register would ever say.
Yes, and they go back.
Speaking about the Teresa Lewis case, real quick about that, it's interesting in that Teresa Lewis hired 2 hitmen to murder her husband and stepson, which they did. They shot them both to death. The 2 hitmen got life in prison. Teresa, being murder for hire, got the death penalty. And she was the 3rd white woman since 1774 to be executed in Virginia. So white women were like unicorns on death row. Yeah. Virginia had this patrician attitude toward white women that they weren't smart enough or strong enough to commit a capital crime, so they almost never got executed.
Well, I understand that, but why would you execute what is fertile and have the ability to propagate the next generation? It just wouldn't make sense to execute women, not a white woman. It makes sense to execute a black woman in this society. It makes sense to execute a black man in this society, right? But can you imagine the amount of opposition that is formulated when you execute a white person.
Yes, and that's what I was going to get to a minute ago when Dale started his presentation by describing how the death penalty began and how it prospered, how it became a rapid-fire killing machine. And that study he cited about revenge being the primary motive and thing that animates the death penalty. It's not outcomes for this deterrent against further crime. So it's hard to imagine that we would have this death penalty without that primary motive of revenge. And if you take out the racial component of it, it's hard to imagine it at all. So you mentioned Ricky Gray a minute ago, Dale, and I wanted to talk about that case simply because it's a plot point for Stan and me. Because when Ricky Gray was finally caught after killing the Harvey family, and we'll back up since we already described a little bit of it. Ricky Gray is a black man who killed this white family, the Harvey family. There were other murders involved, but in the killing spree with his associate Dandridge. But I'm just going to focus on this one part, simply because when they caught Gray, I think the murder was in January, New Year's Day, and then when they caught him, he came to the Richmond City Jail, and that was in August when he was going back and forth for court. And Stan, I don't remember if you were in class that day when I walked in and I realized Ricky Gray was in the jail. Were you there?
I was there.
Yeah. I mean, I was feeling something. And what I remember was that I'm in the same jail as Ricky Gray. And I felt this thick, heavy line forming in the sands of my imagination. And I didn't know what else to say. Everybody's assembled for class and looking at me to start the class, and all I could say was, I don't want that guy anywhere in my class. And I just let it sit there for a minute. And people asked me, well, who do you mean, Dave? And I explained who I meant. But at that moment, it wasn't about him, and it wasn't about the death penalty. It was about my own capacity to hear a story or to help anybody with a story who had done something like that, who could kill.
Good point.
And the way that, and he killed a family in a way that I'm not going to describe here because it's still. But I wanted to mention that as just a point of interest for reflection. Stan and Dale, I'm interested in what you'd have to say about this. Have you either of you wrestled like that with yourself about the ethics of these crimes that people who end up on death row have committed? And what have you concluded from that? Maybe Dale, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrestle with it. You know, I get the same gut punch that everyone gets. And many times when I knew Brian Harvey, I'd met Catherine a couple times, but Brian and I ran in similar circles in the 80s in the counterculture music scene. And when I heard that, my initial thought was that SOB deserves to die, whoever did that. Yeah. Okay. And I will still get that. When I hear of a crime, that is my initial, because I'm human. You know, of course, I'm going to care about the victims. I don't care more about the murderer than the victim, as many try to paint people like me. It's because of the victims that I'm against the death penalty. Okay, because Ricky Gray set our cause back several years probably because the Harveys were so well loved. But again, it comes down to the point. Okay, you want to kill Ricky Gray? Okay, I'll agree with you. Maybe he deserves to die. I don't think we have the capacity or the right to kill him. Okay, if you want to put him in a jail cell and let him live out the rest of his days alone under 24-hour surveillance, that's a death sentence. Okay, in my opinion, that is a death sentence. I get these things. One thing to remember too, and I still get tongue-tied talking about the Ricky Gray case. But one thing you have to remember about what Abolition has done in Virginia, it has diverted a very large amount of money, $4 to $5 million a year, away from executions and into both a Chesterfield Public Defense Office, which it never had, and to victim rights funding. So victims will get more money for things like counseling. The family members will get maybe funeral costs, medical costs, all these things that are going to the victims now. So instead of pouring all this money into killing one person, we're now spreading this money among victims, because that was the whole point of abolition, was about caring and having compassion for the victims, not in killing the murderer. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's a tough topic.
No, but I like the way you translated it. I mean, we all need to do more of that translation from our natural human emotional reaction into like the practical outcome of what's actually going to make a difference in our lives. I think it's when we give into the first knee-jerk emotional reaction that we end up spinning our wheels. Stan, how do you feel about this? Have you wrestled with this?
I have, Dave. I have. And I'm going to quote what Jeffrey Dahmer's father said. He says, "I know my son is terrible. I know he's brutal. I know he deserved to die. But I don't want y'all to kill him." You know? I think that, and I definitely can connect with Dale. When I hear something like that, right, it fucks with my emotions.
Yeah.
You know, at the beginning.
Yeah.
But emotions are feelings. They're feelings, and they're subject to change. When I put logic into it, right? I don't want you to kill my son. I don't want you to kill my son. I realize that my son might be wrong. I realize that he did something heinous. But I don't want you to kill him. I don't want that for my child. And if I don't want it for my child, I can't want it for your child as well. Muhammad and the young lady that got killed, but I mean, I remember when they killed Spencer. Spencer was the Southside Strangler. You know, they executed Spencer, and Spencer only wanted one thing before they carried out that order. He says that since he was the first case that you convicted and gave him a death sentence over DNA, he says, run the DNA again. And they refused to run the DNA again, simply because anytime you have, Dave, yesterday will teach you about today. That lynch mob is a beast.
Yeah.
Public opinion is a beast. Public opinion will take an innocent man and kill him. Public innocent will free. Yeah, public influence, right? Will, if you think about Jesus, right? There was a thief there, and there was an innocent man there, and they say free the thief. They say free the thief and kill the innocent man. I know this. I think I have to applaud Virginia in the Abolition. You know, and I'm not gonna say it should have been years ago, but all of these different things that has been transpiring in our world have led to some changes that we must learn to deal with. That aggression cannot be justified by aggression.
Yes. And I'm glad you put it that way, because that was the next part I wanted to get to in terms of the justifications for the death penalty. And it goes back to what the governor said. I used to believe in eye for an eye justice. And then he went on, I forgot how he said it, but he said, my thinking evolved then. And I wanted to go back and quote from the Bible, because I know at least one of us here on this podcast follows the Bible. And Stan, I'm looking at you.
I'm looking at you, Dave.
I know I can't talk to Dale. I mean, he may, but I know that if I'm going to quote a scripture, that Stan's going to have something to say about it. And here's the part that I looked up that I was interested in how it got into this conversation from the very beginning about this eye for an eye justice. Here's the scripture from Matthew, chapter 5, verse 38. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whatsoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Okay. And what's interesting to me about that is that people forget the way Jesus had interpreted the Old Testament. That's the New Testament. And he's saying what you just said, Stan. You can't drive out evil with evil. Only love and mercy can do that. And so I wanted to maybe Stan, you can start, and Dale, if you want to join in, you can. But Stan, why do you think we, as citizens, as Virginians, as Americans, have found it so difficult in our self-professed Christian country to show love and mercy?
It's not that we can't show love and mercy, right? It's that supremacy. That's what it is. It's we think that black folks have an issue. For real. Hey, I'm gonna tell you the truth. It's white folks that's got the issue. It's not black folks. Y'all had an issue even before we met you. And we came into your household. We came into this land, right? And y'all have made us the issue. You control the narrative. Yeah. White folks, y'all got to figure out what's hurting y'all, because hurt people hurt people. You know, and I never caught that until we met that young lady, Dave. Remember that young lady?
Which one are you talking about?
The one that says that white folks need a whole lot of healing. Y'all need some counseling. You remember with the last podcast?
Oh, on the last podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that may have been more than one. We've
I
heard
think Dale was a part of that. Dale was a part of that.
Oh, you're talking about Anita Green?
Anita Green.
Anita Green from Coming to the Table. That sounds like something Anita would say. Yeah. Yeah, she's right. And she's right.
She's right.
Dale, do you want to chime in on this?
Well, I'm no biblical scholar, but I will say that in my travels around Virginia for 4 years, talking to groups and educating people about the death penalty, a couple of things I found. People who believe in the death penalty believe it in theory. They think the theory of it is foolproof. We are permanently removing people from society who can no longer function in society. But see, that comes from jails back in the previous centuries that were so unreliable they couldn't hold prisoners, or lynch mobs would break in and pull them out. Now, today, we are able to remove people from society who commit these crimes and have proven that it cannot be a part of society. Although the redemption argument does come up too, which I fully believe in. But traveling around the state, it was curious in that I learned very quickly never to use ethical or moral arguments in arguing against the death penalty. And I never did. Even if I was talking to a Catholic men's group, I made the mistake one time of talking about being pro-life to a Catholic group of Knights of Columbus, and it backfired. Okay, their idea of pro-life is not mine, or even amongst themselves, they were all different. I learned very quickly, don't bring up the morality or the ethics of the death penalty. Stick only to cost, deterrence, the possibility of innocence, and the racial disparities. Those were my 4 go-to items. Now, if somebody brought up, well, I believe, and being pro-life, and if I'm against abortion, I'm against the death penalty, I'll say, well, that's great that you feel that way, but I'm not going to stand there and make that argument for them. Okay, that's one they can make themselves. So I learned a lot about talking about morals and ethics traveling around Virginia. And I had to tailor my argument and tailor my lead argument to whoever I was talking to, whether it was a Republican group. And I did talk to a lot of Republican groups. I was at CPAC 2 years in a row as a vendor, talking against the death penalty. Yeah. And it wasn't that bad, really, especially the second time I went in 2018. It was actually, we got a lot of support there. So, it's funny that most people don't even think about the death penalty. Honestly, they don't even think about it. Okay, the few who are strong feelings about it probably account for about 10%. Okay. But, once you peel away the onion and get away from that theory and get to the rotten center, the rotten core, that's when they start understanding, yeah, you know what? The death penalty is not working. Moral arguments, ethical arguments, don't even play into it.
I think, Dave, the reason why the governor changed its point of view is because of everything that's going on in the United States, as well as what's taking place in Virginia. And it makes you rethink some of your dysfunctional thinking. It makes you rethink and say, okay, how can I be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem? I think about Sherman Brown. Sherman Brown was at the WOWO State Penitentiary that was on Belvedere. Sherman Brown was on death row. Doug Wilder commuted all the sentences back to life in prison. Sherman Brown ended up getting DNA 40 plus years later, and he's free now. He's free. But this is a guy that if Doug Wilder wouldn't have, what is it called, Dale? It's not a stay of execution, but
he commuted it. He commuted him to
life. He did everything. Yeah, he did everybody. And I am not saying there should be no punishment, right? But Dave and Dale, you see how people are having a difficult time quarantining themselves and isolating themselves with the pandemic, and how much stress that it goes with just isolating, self-isolation. Hey, I've been in that cell. You put a man on death row, he's gonna go crazy. The statistics tell you that. It drives him crazy because man was never meant to be alone. So now you have two punishments. You have the erosion of sanity, because he's gonna go crazy. I'm crazy. We all crazy. But you're gonna put a crazy man to death now. For what? For revenge. That's not the right motive. Revenge got nothing to do with justice.
I'm compelled by the fact that core argument that you just laid out, Stan, was the least effective in Dale's travels around the state to
Right.
get people to pay attention to it. But money, deterrence, the practical sides of it, guilt and innocence, they would listen to that, which just tells us we have a lot to go. We have a lot further to go in reckoning with the deeper causes of what led us down this tragic road. And that's kind of where I wanted to the last question I wanted to get to. Just before I get there, Dale, to clarify, you said CPAC. Is that Conservative Political Action Committee?
Yeah.
And that's
yeah. They have it every year. The last one.
Okay.
That was the one down in Florida. The last one was down in Florida. They had it up in National Harbor for years and years.
An organization of all these legislators and lobbyists and people who are trying to work on policy on conservative issues.
Right.
Okay. That's what I thought you said, because I remember somebody once invited me to one of those to talk about writing.
Oof, you should have gone.
I almost
should have gone.
I would
what an experience that was.
Hey, if Stan went with me, I'd go.
But we're going, Dave. We're going.
So you guys have kind of already gotten to this, but I wanted just to give you one more crack at it. Where do we go from here? Now that we've gotten to this momentous time where we've actually abolished the death penalty, we went from the leader in executions to the leader in the South to end it. But what do you think is going to happen now to all that emotional and social and political investment that we had in the death penalty? What's going to happen to that feeling of wanting vengeance, and where's that going to go?
Well, I'll step in just for a minute. VADP is going to hang around for a little while. We're going to defend the law, for at least a year, because that's when other states have introduced abolition bills. They have been most, the first year is the most difficult time. One multiple murder, one act of treason, one terrorist attack, and somebody's going to want to bring it back. All right, so we have to guard against that happening. And so we're continuing the education. I'm still doing group presentations on the death penalty, and while I'm working on this book. So ultimately, our board of directors is going to decide in April what's going to happen to the organization, but we're anticipating, because they said Virginia's different. Virginia's not like the northern states who have abolished the death penalty. Virginia would bring it back in a heartbeat, because the supporters in Virginia are rabid supporters. And they won't back down. If you heard any of the arguing on the House and the Senate floors, especially the House floors, during the abolition bill was up, you'll see these supporters are rabid supporters, and they fully believe that it works, and they want to bring it back. And they see a crack in the dam, they're going to bring it back. So we're going to stay around and just keep an eye on things. We don't think in 2022 anything can happen. And usually after the first year or 2 years, it becomes history that nobody just cares to replay. So that's what we're hoping will happen in Virginia. But you just don't know. We get a certain governor in the mansion. We have the House of Delegates flip the Republican control. Who knows what might happen? So it's all about being alert and staying on top of this. So that's what we're doing.
So you haven't worked yourself into retirement quite yet, like I said earlier.
No, I'm not into retirement quite yet. I'm still employed, thank goodness. But we'll see.
All right, Stan.
I'll have to find something else if the board goes otherwise.
Something tells me you will. Stan, where do you think we're going to go from here?
Well, I know where I'm going to go. I got 2 books I'm definitely going to read. I'm going to read The State Penitentiary, and I'm going to read Railroaded.
Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt, Dale. I learned a lot. I think this, Dave. I think forward is the only direction we can go. Sure, we're gonna have to. This issue is not over. This issue is not over because it's connected to emotions. You know, they ought to kill his ass.
Yeah.
You know, it's connected to emotions, right? But when will we start connecting things to the evolution of people? You know, we got so many great minds out here, right? That it would just be wonderful to find out why a person act the way that they act. You know, it's interesting, Dave, because I had a death sentence. I had a death sentence until I met you. You know, and that gave me life. And there's so many people that are in dire need of a stay of execution or a moratorium of execution, right? To be taught how to live. And I'm not saying all people can be reached, but you have to try to reach all people. Because when you told me that story about, I don't want this particular person in my class, I remember I told you, Dave, what teacher really can choose who they teach, choose their students? You gotta teach what comes into the class. And sometimes, right, it's not about you. It's not about their lesson. It's about teaching you a higher lesson of who you could be.
Yeah.
I don't know if none of that made sense.
It made a lot of sense to me, man. At that time in my life, I was prepared to hear the kinds of stories you and Andre and Dean and everybody else brought in. And maybe I've grown enough now that I could hear a harder story. But I think you're right. To get into the core of what makes people do what they do, to have that kind of empathy and understanding for their situation, not to coddle them, not to even forgive them. Let's set that aside. But let's show some mercy and understanding. I think, like Dale mentioned earlier, there's so many causes behind these cases. if we set aside the guilt and innocence factor and if they are proven guilty, we know that mental health and addiction and family background all plays into it. So if we know that now, why do we continue going on an irrational tear of just saying no and no and no?
Because it's like Dale said, cost.
Okay, cost.
Cost. There was a guy, right, that got released from the Department of Correction, and they put him on Brook Road in one of those motels. And his sister called Channel 6 or Channel 12 or the media, and she says that the Department of Correction released my brother and didn't give him no medication. And without the medication, he's gonna hurt somebody. He's gonna hurt somebody. And she understood what his sickness was. And it would just be so helpful to understand what a person's sickness is, maybe not to help them, but maybe to help the next person.
Oh, Joe Gerentano, I think it was Joe Gerentano told me when they released him, he had $25 and a bus ticket. He walked out of prison with $25 and a bus ticket.
That was me too.
Yeah. What?
Yeah. Yeah. Joe Gerentano was he on death row too? No, he was just. Yeah, tell us who Joe.
Yes, he was. He was on death row.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe Gerentano was put on death row, even though there was no evidence linking him to the rape and murder that he has been convicted of. He just woke up in a room with two dead women, and unfortunately, and no evidence. There was evidence that tied someone else to the crime, but nothing that tied him to it. And he got sentenced to death for that. But Governor Wilder, when the state lost all the evidence, commuted his sentence to 25 to life, and he wound up serving 38 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. So a very unfortunate case. But Joe taught himself to be an attorney. He was a writ writer in prison. He helped get Earl Washington, saved Earl Washington from being executed wrongfully. And Joe now works as a paralegal at a law firm, I think in the Richmond area now. So brilliant legal mind on that man, and that made him a problem with the Department of Corrections. He knew too much, you know.
Well, if I can, I'd like to end there, because that's at least a positive note on a very difficult topic of somebody who was shown mercy by the governor. He came out, and even though he suffered a great deal, he managed to turn that around to something that helped the cause.
What a redemption story. What a redemption story.
We got to end there, guys. We got to end with at least a touch of redemption. So thank you both for being on the show. Thank you, Dale Broomfield, for joining us back on the podcast. Thank you, Stan Craddick. Hey, that's our show tonight. If you want to know more about Dale's work, you can go to Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. They have a website that describes all the work that they have been doing, and I guess will continue to do in these trying times. We managed to hold on to the success that we've had. If you want to learn more about the podcast, you can go to writingourwayout.com. You can hear previous episodes there. You can also hear the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. If you go to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. We'd love to hear from you. You can also email me directly from the webpage, and you can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Reach out and let us know what you're thinking. The theme music for Writing Our Way Out the podcast is written and produced by Chris Coogan. You can learn more about him at cooganmusic.com. And finally, this show is produced by Rob Crocker, a PhD student in media, art, and text at Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you, Rob, for making it all happen. And thank you all for listening.
Hey, thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Stan. Good seeing you, David. Take care.